Ezekiel chapter 4 and verse 16, the KJV. Moreover, he said unto me, Son of man, behold, I will break the staff of bread in Jerusalem, and they shall eat bread by weight and with care, and they shall drink water by measure and with astonishment, that they may want bread and water, and be astonished one with another, and consume away for their iniquity. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rachakwadash. Double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone, who rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations be unto the Akim, I hear pushing this gospel in truth and in sincerity, to the best of their ability, given to them by Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord willing, upon your houses. This is the brother Quana Wath come back at you, Lord will, with edifying lesson through his spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord will. It is edifying, Lord will. It is straight to the point. And, I was watching the priest Azam Awath, his lesson earlier that he did this morning. And he was ultimately going into, how Argentina, right, is now eating donkey meat, right? They're having to go from beef, right, to donkey meat, right? Which we've seen this happen, right? Ecclesiastes 1:9, right? There's nothing new under the sun, that which hath been is that which shall be, right? As we read in the scriptures. And again, there's different accounts, or really one major account, right, in the scriptures where, in a time of famine, right, in a time of drought, right, that there was, the people had to ultimately resort to eating, right, the head of a donkey, right, or just donkey meat in general, and we're going to get into it, man, but hey, we're starting to see, the scriptures, right, as we've been seeing, or, but more and more now are we seeing all these different accounts that we read of, right, are starting to come to pass, man, letting you know that a time of trouble, great trouble and distress, right, is going to encompass the whole earth, man, right, as you read in Daniel's 12:1, Matthew's 24:21, Jeremiah 30 verse 7, right, Revelations 3:10, the hour of temptation, right, which is going to try the whole world, right? We're very closely approaching those times, right? And as the elder apostle, Tahar, right, as well as the rest of the apostles and elder bishops, elders, and Akim, right, we've been saying, a lot lately, right? It's especially the apostle Tahar, right? We're months away, it's right around the corner, man. We can feel it through the spirit, But this is on Dario Carioca. It was another article I had seen, just on the matter, right? Looking it up, again, the brother Azam Awath, right? The priest Azam Awath out there in Dallas, right? I was ultimately touching on it, right? The spirit had me, ultimately, look it up, right? As we're supposed to be doing, right? Anytime that we're told something, by the prophets, man, we should be looking it up, right? Going and doing our own research, right? Being having the mindset of the Church of Berea, right? Going and looking these things up, which is what, Apostle Paul commended those brothers, right, from the Church of Berea, because he would tell them and they would go and search it out, right? Search out those matters to see if they were true, right? So this is ultimately the same spirit that we got to be in as well, But I came across this article and it says right here, Argentines swap beef for donkey under Milei's austerity, right? It says with beef prices hitting 25,000 pesos, the legalization of donkey slaughter in Chubut reveals the rawest side of the Casa Rosada's fiscal adjustment, right? And that's ultimately Milei, or however you say his name, which is ultimately a small hat, man. It says Argentina, once the world's breadbasket and the sacred land of the asado, is learning to digest the unthinkable. Hunger, an old acquaintance now dressed in the technical varnish of microeconomic correction, has pushed the middle class and the vulnerable toward a diet that subverts national identity. In Buenos Aires and the provinces, cattle have given way to the donkey, right? It says the phenomenon, which began as a whisper in the suburbs, gained official status when the Ministry of Production of Chubut in Patagonia authorized the commercialization of donkey meat. This is not a gastroeconomic eccentricity or a new gourmet trend. It is the biology of survival dictated by an Excel spreadsheet that refuses to balance, right? So they again, right, with and especially because of this war, right, that's ultimately taken place, which just recently, America, right, ultimately stated that they're not going to, remove their blockade unless Iran, right, comes to a deal, and on top of that, they ultimately seized an Iranian, vessel, you know, which I'm gonna, Lord will, I'll probably, look into that a little bit more, and Lord will do, a lesson on it, but this right here, is what's taking place over there, right, is drastically, hurting, right, the global economy, right. All of these different nations, right, are feeling that pressure, man, especially, Australia, South Korea is feeling that pressure, even here in America, the United States, right? That pressure is being felt, even though, America, recently, just came after Venezuela and took Venezuelan oil. Yes, so America is now, refining Venezuela oil. So we still have oil, if you will, but the last shipments, right, from that came from the Strait of Hormuz, right, through the Strait of Hormuz, right, from the Gulf, right, they've already reached, or they're about to reach, America. And that's the last ones that's ultimately going to be coming in, right? The strait is closed. And this is the same thing for majority of these countries, man, right, that get a lot of their oil through the Strait of Hormuz, right, from these different countries, right, these different OPEC countries like Saudi Arabia, right, UAE, Iran, Iraq, so on and so forth, man. All of those different countries that are over there, right, that surround, or that are connected to, the Strait of Hormuz, man, that utilize the strait to dish out and send and trade that oil, right? A lot of these different countries are feeling that pinch, and that's, like the Philippines, right? They're in, a energy crisis, Cuba in an energy crisis, right? So this is highly affecting the global economy, right? Causing it to where, these different nations are having to make it to where, their work week, right, has to be cut down to save gas, right? To save the LP, or what is the liquid natural gas, I think is what it's called, LNG, which a lot of countries use, especially India, right? India just recently got a shipment, but they were already going through it, So now we're seeing, because it's not just gas, right? It's not just, petrol, right? Crude oil, Brent oil, so on and so forth. It's a lot more than that, right? That comes through the strait, right? A lot of these different countries, right? Like Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, so on and so forth, right? They ultimately, ship out fertilizer, right? Different, products, right? That help, with the fertilizer, right? Like urea, is one of them, that's not coming through. So it's affecting, crops, it's affecting farmers, it's affecting, many different things, right? Regular products, right? Consumer goods, electronics, right? Construction, material, right? The different metals and, all this stuff comes through the Strait of Hormuz, man, right? So it's not just gas, right? It's across the board that's being affected, and these countries are feeling it. And now we're seeing, right, such as you see right here, Argentina, right, is now having to, having to go to donkey meat, right, rather than beef, right? Prices are going up, right? When there's ultimately a supply, you have to understand supply and demand. When the supply is up, meaning there's an abundance of something, right? The people don't need it as much, right? They already have it. So, right, because there's so much of it, which means the price goes down, right? But when it's flipped, when the supply is very low, right, and the people aren't able to acquire whatever it is they need, right? I mean, the demand goes up, right? Everybody needs it, right? The demand goes up. Everybody needs it, which means the price goes up as well. And this is what we're seeing, right? Prices for everything are skyrocketing, especially since America, right, has ultimately been purchasing, right? Because Donald Trump, I think it was last year, right? Instead of putting that money into, farmers and, American farmers and whatnot, Trump ultimately bought a lot of Argentinian beef, which dwindled their supply as well, So this is what we're seeing, right? This is the aftermath, right, of all these different events happening, simultaneously, It says when Javier Milei's government celebrates a marginal drop in monthly inflation as a civilizing victory, the reality at butcher shop counters is one of silent surrender. The price per kilogram of beef at birthright for every Argentine has surpassed the prohibitive barrier of 25,000 pesos in various parts of the country. In contrast, donkey meat presents itself as a protein lifeline, costing a modest 75,000 or 7,500 pesos, man, right? Which donkey, right? If you go into the law, right, the Levitical law, right, Leviticus the 11th chapter, that's an unclean animal, man, and people are ultimately being put in the position to where they're not able to eat a clean animal, right, which is a cow, right, cattle, right? Now they're having to eat donkey, man. Which I personally don't know, how much, or what donkey tastes like. I don't, want to find out, but I'm sure it's not nowhere as good, man. Nowhere is good, man. But it says the arithmetic of despair. It says the math is simple and cruel. At the current exchange rate, donkey meat is sold for nearly a third of the value of a traditional beef cut. This price disparity has not only altered family menus, but has caused a seismic shift in the agricultural market. The sector, accustomed to dealing with global fluctuations in Chicago, now must face domestic demand for an animal that was previously only used for traction or scenery. Right? It says Gonzalo Morera, a butcher shop owner in the federal capital, confirmed to Radio 750 that beef consumption has plummeted by 20%. This drop does not represent a sudden outbreak of vegetarianism, but rather the financial asphyxiation of a population seeing its purchasing power obliterated month after month. Donkey meat is not a choice. It is what remains when the state decides that the surplus is more sacred than the basic food basket, right? So this is what they're, ultimately left with, This is what they're ultimately left with, man, And again, this is something that we had seen, in the past, right? What is that? 2 Kings, the 6th chapter, right? It's like in 1 Kings 6. 1 Kings 6. Was that 24? No, I was correct the first time. 2 Kings, the 6th chapter, around the 24th verse. Right? It says what? The siege of Samaria, right? It says / cannibalism, right? Which is ultimately what? When the famine ultimately starts to get really bad, this is what is next, right? Cannibalism, right? It says right here, the siege of Samaria. It says, and it came to pass after this, that Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, gathered all his hosts and went up and besieged Samaria. And there was a great famine in Samaria. And behold, they besieged it until an ass's head was sold for 80 pieces of silver. 80, meaning 80 pieces of silver, right? Which is a lot of fucking money today, man. A shit ton of money, It says in the 4th part of a cab of dove's dung for 5 pieces of silver, right? Meaning bird poop, right? So they had nothing, no food left. So they resorted to going to what? Eating donkey, eating bird poop. And see, this is what we're seeing, right? For survival, we just read in the article, right? For survival, right? They're resorting to eating donkey, right? And it's only going to continue to get worse from there, right? Especially since the global economy is crumbling, All these different countries are going into an energy crisis, man, All these different, these farmers for these different countries are not able to buy, you know, fertilizer and stuff like that. One, because prices are going up, and two, right, they're not getting the products that they need for for their crops. You know, this is huge, man. Right, this is breaking news. Right, showing you that we are in some very serious times, man. And it's not just stopping, right? In Argentina, right? It's not just stopping, in a few countries around the globe. Hey, soon it's gonna hit here in America, man. Right? Prices here in America are gonna skyrocket as well. Right? Got the other article that I had queued up. This is on the End Time Headlines. It says, record U.S. drought sparks fears about wildfires, water supply, and food prices. Right? So as things continue to dry up, right, we're getting into summer, right? In Arizona, it's already almost 100 degrees. It's hovering right between 92, 97, It'll fluctuate some days, right? But here in the next month, we're going to jump all the way up to 100, 105, easy, So you best believe the Southwest, right, of America is going to continue to heat up. There's going to be more and more droughts, right? It says a growing drought across parts of the United States is fueling concerns about an increased famine or increase. What is it? I don't look like some fucking Arabic or something. An increase of wildfires, strained water supplies, and higher food prices, according to recent reporting by CBS News. Large areas of the country, particularly in the West and portions of the Midwest, are experiencing unusually dry conditions in the Midwest, right? Which, like Wyoming, Nebraska, Arkansas, so on in the, in that general area, right? It's considered the Northwest, or it's like the Midwest, right? It's considered the Midwest, right? Ohio, is considered, the Midwest, in which a lot of those, like North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, those are a lot of the farming states, right? The agricultural states, like, just north of Mississippi, right? That Mississippi River is used, right? Is a huge, vein, right? For transportation when it comes to moving those, grains and products, right? That are grown in the Midwest, right? Through, the different parts of America, So that's a huge vein, man, and those areas are the ones that are experiencing, the drought, right? The drier weather, right? It says experts say the lack of rainfall combined with higher than average temperatures is creating a dangerous combination that would have widespread economic and environmental consequences, right? Officials warn that dry vegetation is already setting the stage for a potentially severe wildfire season. When fuels are this dry, it doesn't take much to spark a fire that can spread rapidly, right? And we already were seeing, I think it was Nebraska was up in flames, right? Which is, again, another huge, agricultural state, right? Farming state, So this is really just to add, insult to injury, if you will, right? As they say in the world, right? It says fire agencies are preparing for what could be months of heightened activity, especially in regions already prone to seasonal fires. Water supplies are also under pressure. Reservoir levels in some areas are dropping, and communities that depend on consistent water access are being urged to conserve, right? Water is going to become more and more scarce, man. You're going to have, people, leaving certain states, moving to different states, right? For to ultimately stay around food, stay around water, But that's not going to help. Again, this is going to be something that's ultimately going to, encompass, the whole land, right? All of the whole land. Prices are going to go up. Your resources are going to go down, Let me grab this, right? And I think it's in Amos, the 5th chapter, if I'm not mistaken. Is it? Think. Slovakia. Let me find it. Salak. God, I found it. This is Amos chapter 4. And verse 6 says, and I also have given you cleanness of teeth in all your cities, and want of bread in all your places. Yet have you not returned unto me, saith the Lord Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua. Right? It says, and also I have withholden the rain from you, when there were yet 3 months to the harvest, and I caused it to rain upon one city, and caused it not to rain upon another city. One piece was rained upon, and the piece whereupon it rained not withered. Right? These places are, becoming dry. Right? There's no rain. That the drought. Right? It says, so 2 or 3 cities wandered unto one city to drink water, but they were not satisfied. Yet have ye not returned unto me, saith the Lord Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua. And there you go. Right? You're gonna have people fleeing, right, from one state to the next, right, trying to, get that water, try to get that food and better prices, so on and so forth. But hey, that's not the case, right? It's, again, this famine, right, that is fastly approaching, is going to encompass the whole land, right? Soon you're not going to be able to find food or water, right? Let's go here in Second Esdras 6 and verse 22. It says, and suddenly shall the sown places appear unsown, the full storehouses shall suddenly be found empty. Right? And I think it was I can't remember his name, but he ultimately heads, right, the Department of Transportation, in the government, and he ultimately just withheld $73 million, right, from New York, because they were ultimately handing out, CDL licenses, man, so they're ultimately going to revoke more and more, truck drivers, right, their license, and pull them off of the roads, and that's going to ultimately hinder, the transportation, right? The food supply, right? That ultimately gets delivered from these ports to these warehouses, from the warehouses to these major retailers and so on and so forth. These major grocery stores, right? Meaning the food supply, right, that you see at these warehouses and so on and so forth is going to continue to dwindle, right? You're going to see less and less food, right, in these stores. So and what's going to happen, right? Food prices are going to go up, right? Of whatever's left, right? Again, understanding supply and demand, when the supply is low, demand is high, prices rise. And we're in the time where hyperinflation is going to take hold, which is prophecy, right? Pursuing Revelations, the 6th chapter, right? The fifth and the 6th verse, right? Verse 23, it says, it says, and the trumpet shall give a sound, which when every man heareth, they shall be suddenly afraid, right? Because it's going to be a time of trouble, and people are going to start wigging out, man. Verse 24, it said, at that time shall friends fight one against another like enemies, and the earth shall stand in fear with those that dwell therein. The springs of the fountain shall stand still, and in 3 hours they shall not run. Meaning there's not going to be any food, there's not going to be any water. And what do you think the people are going to do? The people are going to, wig out. These people are not reading the scriptures. These people are not going to be applying the scriptures. Remember, these people, as you read in Isaiah the 60th chapter, right? Gross darkness covered the earth, right? And these people are in darkness, man. They don't have the understanding of the scriptures, right? They're not going to be leaning upon the scriptures in the times to come, right? They're not going to be remembering, Sirach 2, Sirach the 2nd chapter, verse 4, where it says, make not haste in the time of trouble, right? They're not going to be applying that scripture. So they're going to ultimately be what, right? They're going to be wigging out. They're going to be flipping out. These people are going to be in straits, and they're going to be robbing these different stores, man. They're going to be, breaking into these storehouses, right? Not giving a shit, because what are they? They're trying to make sure that they can eat, right? People are going to want to feed their families. People are going to want to eat themselves, not like eat themselves, but they want to eat, right? So they're going to try to do everything they can to make sure that they can eat, which is Second Esdras the 15th chapter, right? Starting at the 15th verse, right? Fucking Satan always doing this shit. Second Ezra 15, verse 15, it says for this, verse 16, it says, for there shall be sedition among men and invading one another. They shall not regard their kings nor princes, and the course of their actions shall stand in their power. So as we see the times continue to, increase, right, and get worse, and more, crime, right, it's going to increase. And then people are not going to give a fuck, man. We're already seeing these no king protests happening, damn near every other weekend, especially out here in Arizona, right? You constantly having these no kings protests, man. They're only going to continue, and soon it's going to become, more violent, Verse 17, it says, a man shall desire to go into his city and shall not be able, right? Because again, right, as things continue to get worse, you're going to have, the military, right, ultimately coming in, right, setting up, curfews, and roadblocks and so on and so forth, right? Remember, we had seen recently, out there in Chicago, you had those YNs, right? It was like 400 plus, right? Basically, wreaking havoc in the city. And what they do, right? They set a curfew, right? And was arresting anybody that broke that curfew. That's what we're going to start to see happen more and more. It says, verse 18, for because of their pride, the city shall be troubled, the houses shall be destroyed, and men shall be afraid, right? Time of trouble. It says, a man shall have no pity upon his neighbor, right? We just saw that, right? Friends shall fight one another like enemies, right? It says, but shall destroy their houses with the sword and spoil their goods because of the lack of bread and for great tribulation, right? Because there's no food and no water. It's gonna get all hell is gonna break loose, man. And it's gonna happen soon, right? This isn't something that's gonna, it's gonna take 4 to 5 years to, 2-3 years, right, in order to reach that point. We're looking at this time happening within the next few months, right? We're looking at, crime increasing within the next month or two, right? All hell breaking loose within the next few months, Lord will, we hope and we pray that ultimately takes place, man. But it's going to be soon. It's not going to be, it's not going to be, years away, and then what's going to happen? Again, at that point, people are going to resort to, just like we're seeing in Argentina, right? Which the people can still, buy, beef. They're just gonna have to spend more money for it if they got the bread to do it, right? But donkey is being made, an option, right? A more viable option than beef because of the price and because of the abundance of it, the abundance of donkeys that they do have, down there, man, But soon that might be the only meat that they do have. That might be it, and that might even run out, We don't know, man, but we understand that we're coming into these times and the Lord is about to, strike judgment, right, upon this place, man. And again, right, as this famine continues to increase, a cannibalism is going to be the next option, right? Going back to that 2 Kings, the 6th chapter. I actually think I have it right here. Oh, no, I didn't. 2 Kings, the 6th chapter. And when you drop down to the 24th verse, right, it says what? A great famine, right, to where, an ass's head, right, sold for 80 pieces of silver, right? Dove's dung sold for 5 pieces of silver, right? As you continue on, it says verse 6, 2 Kings 6:26, it says, as the king of Israel was passing by upon the wall, there cried a woman unto him, saying, help, my lord, O king. And he said, if the Lord do not help thee, whence shall I help thee? Out of the barn floor or out of the winepress? And the king said unto her, what aileth thee? And she answered, this woman said unto me, give thy son, that we may eat him today. Right? They're actually eating their woman or eating their children, right? These women are eating their children. It says, and we will eat my son tomorrow. So he boiled my son and did eat him. And I said unto her on the next day, give thy son that we may eat him. And she hath hid her son, right? So they were actually eating, right, each other's children, like their own children, right? Which again, right, this has happened, right, many different accounts, right, throughout the scriptures. Let's grab this in Isaiah. What is it? Isaiah 19. And Was Isaiah 19? Oh, it's Isaiah 9 if I'm not mistaken. Right here. It says Isaiah 9. And I started verse 19 just to get the point. It says, through the wrath of the Lord Yahweh by Hashem Yahushua of hosts is the land darkened, and the people shall be as the fuel of fire. No man shall spare his brother. Right? And he shall snatch on the right hand and be hungry, and he shall eat on the left hand, and they shall not be satisfied. They shall eat every man the flesh of his own arm. Right? And in Jeremiah, the 19th chapter, right? It says right here, Jeremiah 19 verse 8. Let me highlight it. It says, and I will make this city desolate and hissing. Everyone that passeth thereby shall be astonished and hiss thereof at all of all the plagues thereof. And I will cause them to eat the flesh of their sons and the flesh of their daughters, and they shall eat every one the flesh of his friend in the siege and straitness wherewith their enemies, and they that seek their lives shall straiten them. That's right. You know, so it's gonna be, you know, first it's gonna be what, them eating, you know, their family members, right? When there's no food, when there's all the different storehouses in all these different houses, these people's homes, apartments, whatever it may be, right? When there's no food, right, there's gonna be what? There's gonna be cannibalism that's gonna take place. You know, people are gonna be eating their loved ones, and when there's nobody else around, when they ate everybody around them, what are they gonna do? They're gonna eat themselves, man. You know, you've seen it in there was a part in you know, in what was that? Not what is it? Damn, a zombie TV show that was so big. I can't remember what it was called. Damn, I can't remember what it's called, man. Well, it'll come back to mind. But there was a part in there, you know, where, you know, they basically had, you know, hemmed up this man. They grabbed him, and it was a group of men. And what they did is they kept him alive, but they would eat they would eat his body parts, man. You know, they would eat enough to where, you know, they would be able to eat but keep him alive still. And they would just eat off his body as he was alive. And see, this is the type of shit that we're gonna see, right? Not only outside in these different countries and so on and so forth, even here in America, man. You know, it's gonna take place, man. You know, you can sit here and deny it all you want. America's, you know, the greatest country in the world. America has the greatest army or military, so on and so forth. But hey, this is all according to prophecy, and we've been telling y'all, right, starting with the elder apostles of Great Millstone, that Jacob's trouble is coming, World War III is coming, and now we're in the midst of both those prophecies. Well, how much more, right? The other prophecies that we're telling you about, such as this one, right? The famine about to hit, cannibalism is ultimately gonna, you know, take hold as well. You know, this is what's coming, man. You know, and this is ultimately gonna happen and take hold of those, right, who ultimately, you know, continue to walk in wickedness. You know. Let's grab this in what's that? Sirach, the 40th chapter, right? It says right here, Sirach 40 and verse 8, it says, such things happen unto all flesh, both man and beast, and that is sevenfold more upon sinners, right? Those who, you know, continue to, you know, to willingly, you know, commit iniquity upon iniquity, which is sin upon sin. You know, it says death and bloodshed, strife and sword, calamities, famine, tribulation, and the scourge. These things are created for the wicked, and for their sakes came the flood. Right. So all of you Israelites, you so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, you know, and you Israelite foreigners that want to continue to, you know, walk after the ways, you know, of the world and continue to be wicked and continue to be evil, you know. Continue to be contrary, right, to who the Lord Yahweh by Hashem Yahushua made you to be. Hey, this is what's going to come upon you, man. You know? But see, for those who ultimately do take heed, those who do return, which we know in Isaiah the 10th chapter, that's the remnant, right? The remnant of the nation of Israel. They're the ones that are going to return. They're the ones that are going to repent. They're the ones that are ultimately going to be in that contrite spirit and remember and acknowledge their sins, right? And the Lord's going to have mercy upon them. So when all this, this famine, right, ultimately hits, the Lord is going to make sure that the elect are taken care of, man. What does he say in Psalm 91? Where there no plague shall come nigh thy dwelling. Meaning we're going to be safe, man. We're going to be protected. Let's grab this in Job, the 5th chapter, right? And we'll start at verse 19. Boom. Right? It says, Job 5 and verse 19, it says, he shall deliver thee in 6 troubles, yea, in 7, right, there shall no evil touch thee, right? Which, that 7th trouble is going into that, the ICBM nuclear missiles, right? The destruction, right? And any, minor trouble or affliction, right, that we go through leading up into that moment, right? It says, verse 20, it says, in famine he shall redeem thee from death, and in war from the power of the sword, right? It says, thou shalt be hid from the scourge of the tongue, neither shalt thou be afraid of destruction when it cometh. At destruction and famine thou shalt laugh, neither shalt thou be afraid of the beasts of the earth. So again, Lord will we be part of the elect. Lord will, we're the Lord allows us to endure, all the way into the end, right? Leading up into that deliverance, the Lord is going to be doing miracles for us, right? Taking care of us, right? Furnishing a table in the wilderness for us, making sure that we eat, making sure that we're good. We got water, right? You got all these different doomsday preppers, and so on and so forth, right? That are out here that are, they're prepping, right, for what's coming, but they're not prepping in the right manner, right? They're prepping carnally while we're prepping spiritually, man. We're laying up those riches, in heaven, which, when time comes, we're going to be able to make those spiritual withdrawals, man, which are going to come in the form of us being protected, which are going to come in the form of us, being fed, right? The Lord doing miracles for us, in these times to come. All right, let me grab this. This is in, was that 1 Kings 18 or 17? Yeah, 1 Kings 17 chapter. Let me read this, right? Because this is heavy, right? These are the different miracles, right, that are going to be done for us, right? 1 Kings 17 verse 1, it says, and Elijah the Tishbite, right, who was ultimately a prophet. It says, who was of the inhabitants of Gilead, said unto Ahab, as Yahweh by Hashem Yahushai, power of Israel, liveth, before whom I stand, there shall not be dew nor rain these years, but according to my word, meaning there was going to be a famine, right? And the word of Yahweh by Hashem Yahushai came unto him, saying, get thee hence, and turn thee eastward, and hide thyself by the brook Cherith, that is before Jordan. So the Lord was guiding him through the Spirit, right? It says, and it shall be that thou shalt drink of the brook that I have commanded the ravens to feed thee there. So he went and did according to the word of Yahweh, for he went and dwelt by the brook Cherith, that is before Jordan. And the ravens brought him bread and flesh in the morning, and bread and flesh in the evening, and he drank of the brook, right? The Lord commanded, right, the angels, or the ravens, selected the ravens, right, to ultimately, feed him, right? The Lord making it, what does it say in Job the 5th chapter as well, right? And the beasts of the field shall be in league with thee, man. Let's go and let's confirm that, right? Let's go back. Job 5, what is that? And verse 23, it says, for thou shalt be in league with the stones of the field, and the beast of the field shall be at peace with thee, right? Heavy, man. Heavy. This is what, Lord, will we be part of the elect? This is what's coming, right? We'll continue to read, right? Verse 7, it says, and it came to pass after a while that the brook dried up, because there had been no rain in the land. And the word of Yahweh by Hashem Yahushai came unto him, saying, arise, get thee to Zarephath, which belongeth to Zidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow woman there to sustain thee. So he arose and went to Zarephath, and when he came to the gate of the city, behold, the widow woman was there gathering of sticks. And he called to her and said, fetch me, I pray thee, a little water in a vessel, that I may drink. And as she was going to fetch it, he called to her and said, bring me, I pray thee, a morsel of bread in thine hand. Right. So he was, you know, that famine, man. He was, you know, weak, right, for the lack of water, lack of food, right, because again of that famine, you know, which we might have to go through that. We might have to go through sometimes, you know, where we might not be able to eat, right, for a few days, may not be able to drink water for a couple of days, you know. But you have to believe that the Lord Yahweh B'Shem El Shai is going to guide you, right, to that source, to be able to eat, to be able to, you know, to drink, you know. That's where our faith in Yahweh B'Shem El Shai is going to have to, you know, ultimately kick in, right? It says, and as she said, as Yahweh thy power liveth, I have not a cake, but a handful of meal in a barrel, and a little oil in a cruse. And behold, I am gathering 2 sticks that I may go in and dress it for me and my son, that we may eat it and die. Because she didn't have no more food, right? Again, there was a famine, so the crops and everything like that, you know, were ultimately dwindled, right? So that's all they had. It says, and Elijah said unto her, fear not, go and do as thou hast said, but make me thereof a little cake first, and bring it unto me, and after make for thee and thy son. For thus saith Yahweh, power of Israel, the barrel of meal shall not waste, neither shall the cruse of oil fail, until the day that Yahweh sendeth rain upon the earth. So he's saying that the Lord is going to bless, right, your meal and your oil, meaning it's not going to run out, right? This is literally what he's saying, right? And it says, and she went and did according to the saying of Elijah, and she and he and her house did eat many days. So she's saying only got this little bit, but they ate many days, man. That goes back to, you know, when Yahweh Shai, you know, he break the bread, right, and the fish, and fed, was it 4,000 and 5,000, right, in different moments. I think it was two different accounts, right? One was 4,000 besides women and children, 5,000 besides women and children, right? Just off of a few baskets, you know. These are the same miracles that the Lord Yahweh B'Shem El Shai are going to do for the elect, right? Verse 16, and the barrel of meal wasted not, neither did the cruse of oil fail, according to the word of Yahweh which he spake by Elijah. Right? These are beautiful accounts, man. These are things that we have to continue to meditate upon as we see these things, you know, ultimately unfolding, right? So I'll go ahead and grab this and we'll close out. This is Isaiah 33 and verse 15. It says, verse 15, it says, he that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly, he that despiseth the gain of oppressions, that shaketh his hands from the holding of bribes, that stoppeth his ears from hearing of blood, and shutteth his eyes from seeing evil. Ultimately, and I like to say, you know, those that are ultimately, you know, coming in the spirit of Job, right? Job eschewed evil, right? He hated it, right? And this is how we have to be. This is what the Lord is going to do for those that are ultimately in that same spirit. Verse 16, he shall dwell on high. His place of defense shall be the munitions of rocks. Bread shall be given him. His waters shall be sure. Right? Meaning they're going to be certain, meaning they're going to be guaranteed, right? The Lord is going to make sure that we get that water, make sure that we get food, even when nobody else is getting it. Right? And we pray and we hope that that's us. Right? It says, thine eyes shall see the king in his beauty. They shall behold the land that is very far off, man. And again, right, this is all what we're hoping for. We understand and we see what's coming, right? But we hope and we pray we're part of that number where the Lord ultimately, you know, make sure that we have what we need, right? What did he say when, you know, heaviness and trouble cometh? Then thou shalt be merry and have abundance, right? Lord will, we're of that number. That's going to be for us, man. You know? Hey, we truly have nothing to worry about, man. Yahweh B'Shem El Shai is going to take care of us, man. You know? But that's all I got, man. Lord wills that I find Lord straight to the point. I want to give all praise, honor, glory to Yahweh B'Shem Yahweh Shai B'Shem Rechak Wadash. Again, double honor to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone. Until next time, I say shalom.